Prince George heard 6 words that shattered the future of the royal family in seconds, and no one was supposed to know he heard them. It was a cold December morning inside Windsor Castle, the kind of day when the frost kissed the gardens and the halls carried a silence deeper than usual. Prince George, just a boy of 7, walked past the long, polished corridors with the rhythm of routine breakfast neatly eaten, shoes polished, small hands clutching a school bag, head carried countless times. But this morning was different. The air itself seemed heavier, as if the walls were holding their breath. And then it happened. A few quiet words, spoken so softly they should have been harmless, but somehow they weren't. Maria, the nanny who had watched over George and his siblings for years, had spoken in a voice that cracked ever so slightly. Not a shout, not a warning, but the kind of hushed tone adults use when they're trying to protect someone from truths too heavy to bear. "It's confirmed. It's not temporary anymore," she said. George didn't fully understand the meaning, but his chest tightened immediately, his stomach dropped, and in an instant, the calm morning shattered. George froze mid-step, the hallway stretching like a tunnel around him. His mind raced, filling in blanks that no child should ever be asked to imagine. His little brother, Prince Louie, had been different lately, more withdrawn, quieter than usual, skipping playful moments and curling up under blankets instead of chasing Charlotte through the palace corridors. George had noticed, yes. He had even wondered why, but now the truth, though incomplete, hit him like a thunderclap. He didn't speak at first. The tears came slowly, not in cries that could be heard across the hallway, but in quiet, trembling sobs that shook his small shoulders. Mariah's hand reached instinctively, brushing against him, but George barely registered it. All he could think about was Louie, and the fact that the world inside the palace had shifted in a way he didn't yet fully understand. The 6 words he overheard were enough to pull him into a fear he couldn't name. "Does Mom know?" he whispered, voice barely audible. Mariah's reply was calm, careful, but it carried the weight of the palace's secret. "Yes, she's known for a while." That simple affirmation didn't comfort George. Instead, it made the hidden fear more real. For weeks, he had been living inside a storm he hadn't known existed, seeing subtle changes in his brother, but powerless to stop them. Suddenly, it was no longer just worry, it was understanding. The family's careful silence, their well-rehearsed routines, and the walls that had kept everything orderly, now they pressed down, heavy and unyielding, onto a small boy who had no choice but to feel the weight of it all. Later that morning, Catherine found him curled up in the sitting room, hands clasped tightly, eyes wide and distant. She didn't speak at first. She simply sat beside him, steady, letting the moment exist. George finally asked what had been buried in his thoughts. "Will he get better?" Catherine's answer was calm but honest. "He'll have to live with this, but we'll be right beside him every step of the way." That moment, simple yet profound, marked the first time George understood the truth inside their home, and that understanding, though necessary, brought no immediate comfort, only the clarity that life as he knew it was forever changed. Now, I want to hear your thoughts on this. How do you think a child should be prepared for life-changing news within a family? The official confirmation arrived quietly, almost invisibly, as if trying to slip past the grandeur of Windsor Castle without notice. A plain courier, a plain envelope, and a few typed pages held inside what no parent ever wants to read. Catherine opened it in the stillness of her private sitting room, the only sound the faint crackle of the fireplace. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breath remained steady. But inside, the world she had built for her children shifted irreversibly. The words were clinical, precise, and final. Chronic condition confirmed, requires long-term care, stress management essential. Professional language designed to inform, yet to Catherine, every sentence felt like a hammer striking at the core of her heart. She had noticed subtle signs in Louie for weeks, tiny differences that could be dismissed as growing pains. Shorter walks, earlier naps, a faint tremor in his hand that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. He had laughed less, skipped more school days, withdrawn into quiet corners that once held mischief and play. Catherine had hoped, perhaps even unconsciously, that it was temporary, that the boy who once chased his siblings across palace halls would return to his energy, his spark, his joy. But the envelope held no hope of returning. This was the beginning of a new reality. William arrived later that evening, returning from a briefing in London, unaware that the house had already changed. The silence was palpable, the usual palace rhythm replaced by something heavier, almost sacred. Catherine handed him the envelope without speaking. Minutes passed as he read, reread, and absorbed the words. Then, finally, he asked what mattered most to him. "How much do the children know?" Catherine shook her head. "Not enough," she admitted. And in that moment, the weight of the decision settled over them both. How do you tell a child that life will no longer follow the paths of ordinary expectation? How do you protect innocence while confronting reality? Inside the palace, subtle shifts began almost immediately. Meetings were quietly rescheduled. Events were postponed. School pickups rearranged. Even the staff noticed the invisible changes, small gestures, hushed conversations, and the way the air itself seemed heavier, loaded with unspoken truths. The family's priority was no longer tradition, ceremony, or even public perception. It was survival. Emotional safety, care, and the creation of space for healing became the new protocol. For George, the realization hit hardest. His quiet sobs earlier that morning were just the beginning. At school, he withdrew. At home, routines that had once grounded him evaporated. Breakfasts became silent. Evenings became lonelier, and the laughter that had once echoed through the palace seemed muted. Charlotte tried in her small ways gentle touches, whispered jokes, quiet reassurances, but George's grief was a shadow that could not be lifted with play. He was old enough to notice, young enough to be powerless, carrying a secret too heavy for his age. Even Maria, who had served the family for years, felt the unprecedented change. She had navigated royal crises, media scrutiny, and exhausting tours, but nothing prepared her for watching a child's light dim, another child's grief silently deepen, and a family recalibrate around a truth that could not be undone. In the quiet corners of the palace, a new rhythm formed, one guided not by protocol, but by love, presence, and the heavy responsibility of protecting young hearts from the storm outside. This is something that really makes you think. Should parents fully disclose serious health issues to children immediately, or wait until they are older?
When we first started it, it started as a very small idea with Harry and I scratching our heads going, how can we do something that's going to help us in the future?
Inside Kensington Palace, the weight of truth settled like a fog, subtle yet unrelenting. Days after the official confirmation, George's world had shifted entirely. The corridors that once carried laughter now echoed quiet footsteps and tentative whispers. At school, his teachers noticed the change immediately. The boy who had once raised his hand eagerly, shared jokes during recess, and scribbled stories in his notebook had retreated into himself. He stared out windows for long stretches, notebooks untouched, thoughts trapped inside a mind too young to process the gravity of what he knew. Back home, the shift was no less profound. Morning routines once filled with laughter, football with palace guards, and music practice faded into silence. Even mealtimes became subdued, punctuated by the quiet scrape of cutlery and the occasional sigh. Charlotte, younger but perceptive, tried to reach him. Gentle touches, whispered words, small attempts to pull him back into the world. But grief, George learned, doesn't bend to kindness alone. He wasn't ignoring his sister out of malice, he was carrying a weight that made every interaction feel fragile, every word dangerous. Catherine, aware of the deepening strain, began observing quietly, noting patterns, small fractures in the boy's daily rhythm. That evening, she suggested a family activity, a movie, perhaps, or a board game. William brought a game. Louie participated cautiously, leaning on Charlotte. But George stayed silent, excusing himself early, retreating upstairs to the sanctuary of his room. There, he opened an old photo album filled with snapshots of happier days. Louie laughing on the beach, building sandcastles, running without hesitation. George wept quietly, whispering words that felt too heavy for his age. "I should have known." In that moment, Catherine sat at the foot of his bed, offering no advice, no quick reassurances. She simply listened, allowing the boy to speak aloud the fears he couldn't name. And when he admitted that he didn't know how to help Louie, she responded with the simplest truth: "You don't have to fix it. You just have to love him." It was a revelation for George Love as action, as presence, not as solution. Something shifted in him. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to be held, comforted, without resistance. Meanwhile, Maria, who had weathered royal tours, press storms, and sleepless nights, observed the unprecedented transformation within the household. Louis's energy dimmed, Georges' grief deepened, and Charlotte's innocence was challenged by questions she could barely form. Maria recognized the urgent need for guidance, not just protection, but understanding. Quietly, she approached Catherine with a gentle warning. The children know more than we realize. They're hurting, and they need guidance. Catherine, exhausted yet resolute, whispered back, "So do I." That night, behind the palace walls, a new plan formed. The family began creating spaces where the children could reconnect without cameras, schedules, or the pressure of perfection. Painting sessions, story hours, evening walks, moments designed to allow love to exist without performance. For the first time, the palace shifted from a fortress of tradition to a sanctuary of emotional survival. Georges' small acts of courage, reading with Louis, revisiting memories, became anchors in a storm no royal protocol had ever anticipated. Take a moment and consider this. What role should siblings and caregivers play in supporting a child facing a serious illness in the family?
But I've had a fantastic medical team who have taken great care of me, for which I'm so grateful. In January, I underwent major abdominal surgery in London, and at the time, it was thought that my condition was non-cancerous.
The day the statement was released, the world paused. Windsor Castle, usually a place of quiet tradition, became the epicenter of global attention, not for scandal, but for raw, undeniable humanity. Catherine and William's message did not read like a political briefing or a royal decree. It read like a family speaking from the heart, stripped of ceremony, titles, and performance. George had watched quietly, still processing the storm inside him, but even he could sense the weight of the moment. The family had taken control, not for show, but to protect Louis from rumor, speculation, and misrepresentation. Responses were instantaneous. Major outlets covered the news with restraint and empathy. Social media overflowed with messages of support and love. Outside the palace, ordinary citizens left candles, children's drawings, and handwritten notes. One small sign, in a child's handwriting, reads simply, "Be strong, Lou Bug. We love you." Catherine reportedly glimpsed it from a car window and turned away, overwhelmed not by attention, but by the depth of collective kindness directed toward a family she was determined to shield. But not all reactions were gentle. Tabloids demanded specifics, speculated about Louis's condition, and implied the palace was hiding more. The family did not respond. Silence became strategy, not from avoidance, but from protection. Inside, life recalibrated. Morning routines were later, outdoor breaks longer, school schedules adjusted, and a private counselor trained for long-term support was designated. Public appearances were assessed case by case. Each decision prioritized Louis's emotional and physical well-being over optics. In the days following, the palace witnessed quiet healing. George slowly emerged from withdrawal, visiting Louis's room each night, reading stories, sharing memories. They played board games, laughed cautiously, and rebuilt trust in the space between them. Louis, still fragile but determined, began responding to small gestures of care and companionship. Charlotte, ever perceptive, provided gentle encouragement. The siblings were discovering each other again, learning that love could exist alongside fear, grief, and uncertainty. Even Maria, who had guided the children through years of public scrutiny, recognized a subtle transformation. She was no longer merely a guardian. She was a calm anchor, ensuring the family navigated trauma without losing themselves. And through it all, Catherine and William balanced attention to duty with deep, unwavering focus on their children. The palace walls, once symbols of tradition and ceremony, had become the quiet theater of courage, resilience, and intimacy, hidden from the world, yet witnessed by those who truly mattered. Finally, let me ask you this. How much of a public figure's private family life should the media share, especially when children are involved?
Incredible charities doing really great work, but felt that we could give more, and how could we do that? And so the foundation idea sort of bubbled up as a sort of vehicle to be able to do more when we walked away from these engagements.
This story is not a scandal. It is a human drama unfolding behind the walls of royalty, revealing the fragility and resilience that exists in every family, no matter how public their life may be. For George, Louie, and Charlotte, it was a lesson in courage, love, and the limits of control. For Catherine and William, it was a reminder that even titles and crowns cannot shield a family from the reality of illness, grief, and fear. The palace became both refuge and stage, where the most private struggles were quietly navigated with care, empathy, and courage. In these moments, we see the universality of love and responsibility, the weight of knowing, the challenge of protecting, and the struggle to balance public scrutiny with private vulnerability are things any parent can understand. What unfolds here is not a story of spectacle, but of patience, understanding, and emotional presence. It is a story of small gestures that restore hope, stories of siblings reconnecting, of parents listening, of a family choosing humanity over image. And yet, questions linger. How do families in the public eye reconcile privacy with public expectation? How much should the world see, and how much should remain protected? And for George and Louie, what will the next chapters of life hold, shaped by love but shadowed by uncertainty?
If you enjoy in-depth coverage of the stories shaping celebrity culture and entertainment, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay connected for the next big story.